The scent of roasting turkey filled every corner of my home, a fragrance that had been the herald of Thanksgiving for 47 years. I, Eleanor, was not just a host. I was the architect of this annual feast, a tradition built on sacrifice and unending love. For weeks, I had been preparing, meticulously planning every detail. The house, a stately two-story colonial that had been my sanctuary for over 5 decades, was polished to a gleam. The silver was buffed, the crystal sparkled, and the dining table, a heavy oak heirloom passed down from my grandmother, was set with the fine china I only ever brought out for this one day. My hands, marked by the years and countless hours of care for my family, moved with a practiced, almost religious reverence. Every dish I prepared had a story, a memory woven into its texture and taste. The green bean casserole was the same recipe my mother taught me, the pumpkin pie a secret handed down from my husband, Thomas, who passed away 10 years ago. It was more than a meal, it was a testament to our history, a tangible representation of the family I had raised and nurtured within these walls. My 2 children, Robert and Susan, had been my entire world since Thomas's death. I had poured every ounce of my energy, every cent of my savings into them. Robert, my eldest, was a successful corporate lawyer, a man who spoke in terms of mergers and acquisitions, his voice always carrying an air of authority. Susan, my sweet, sensitive daughter, had become a brilliant architect, designing stunning modern homes that were the envy of her peers. I had paid for their private school education, their undergraduate tuition at Ivy League universities, and even a significant portion of their postgraduate studies. My legacy, I believed, was not in the bricks and mortar of my home, but in the intelligence and success of my children. I had sold the small antique collection Thomas, and I had curated over a lifetime and even dipped into my pension fund to ensure they had the best start in life. My home, my sanctuary, was a monument to their success, a place where they could always return and feel safe, loved, and celebrated. The doorbell rang, its chimes echoing through the house, a sound I had been waiting for all morning. First came Susan, her face a mask of exhaustion and a forced smile. Behind her was her husband, Mark, a man whose ambition was as sharp as his suits, and their 2 children, 12-year-old Lily and 14-year-old Sam. They breezed in, immediately pulling out their phones, a wall of digital distractions separating them from the warmth I had so carefully created. A few minutes later, Robert arrived with his wife, Clara, a woman whose beauty was matched only by her cold, calculating eyes. With them were their children, 18-year-old Ethan and 16-year-old Chloe. Their arrival was less a homecoming and more an invasion. Clara immediately began critiquing the decor, suggesting I modernize, get rid of the dusty old furniture. Robert, instead of a warm embrace, offered a brief, businesslike peck on the cheek and immediately asked if I had seen a letter from the bank, his brow furrowed with a seriousness that felt out of place on a day meant for gratitude. The afternoon descended into a blur of forced smiles and thinly veiled criticisms. At the dining table, the conversation was dominated by their work, their vacations, their children's achievements. My attempts to share an old family story were met with polite nods and quick changes of subject. I felt like a ghost in my own house, a relic of a past they were eager to forget. The feast I had spent so much time and effort preparing was eaten with detached efficiency. Susan commented that the turkey was a little dry, Robert complained that the gravy lacked flavor, and Clara, in a voice dripping with condescension, suggested that I should try a pre-made stuffing next year to save myself the trouble. My heart sank with each word, each criticism a pinprick in the fragile balloon of my joy. I had given them my all, and they were giving me back nothing but a cold, hollow emptiness. As the meal concluded, a new, more sinister atmosphere settled over the room. Robert cleared his throat, a gesture he used in his office to command attention. "Mom," he began, his tone a practiced mixture of feigned concern and firm authority, "we need to talk about your well-being. Susan and I are worried about you living here alone. It's too much house for one person." My blood ran cold. The words, though seemingly spoken out of care, felt like daggers. Susan, always the softer of the two, chimed in, "Mom, it's just a lot to maintain." The stairs, the garden, it's a burden. We've looked into a few assisted living facilities that are just lovely. You'd have friends, activities. Clara, never one to mince words, cut to the chase. We've decided it's best for you to move into a community. It's what's best for everyone. Her use of everyone felt particularly cruel. The subtext was clear. It was what was best for them. I looked around the table at the faces of my family, the people I had given my life to. My grandchildren were engrossed in their phones, oblivious to the conversation. Mark and Susan stared at their hands, unable to meet my gaze. Robert, my son, my boy, looked at me with an expression that was both pitying and determined, as if this was a difficult but necessary business deal. I was no longer their mother, their grandmother. I was an asset to be managed, a problem to be solved. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat of betrayal and terror. This was not a discussion. This was a verdict. The rest of the evening was a blur. They had a late-night flight to catch, and the house, once filled with my preparations, was now a whirlwind of their departure. Suddenly, a new problem arose. Clara, with an air of theatrical concern, claimed she had lost a very expensive pair of diamond earrings and was convinced they must be in my bedroom. "Mom," she said, her voice a saccharine sweet lie, "I'm so sorry, but I really need to check your room. It's the only place they could be. Would you mind if I just—" Before I could even answer, Robert stepped forward, his expression grave. "Mom, we've decided to lock your room for the night. The movers are coming tomorrow to take some of your things to storage to help with the transition. It's safer this way." He gestured to Mark, who produced a heavy-duty padlock and a set of keys. My children, my own flesh and blood, were going to lock me out of my own bedroom. I stood there, frozen, as the metallic click of the padlock echoed through the hallway. The room I had shared with Thomas, the place where I had raised my children, where I had laughed and cried and dreamt, it was now a fortress, a symbol of their control. Susan, seeing the tears welling in my eyes, rushed to hug me, but her embrace felt hollow. "It's for your own good, Mom," she whispered, her voice full of a false pity that was more painful than any cruelty. "We love you." Robert, ever the pragmatist, simply handed me a set of keys to the guest room. "You can stay here. It's more than comfortable." The guest room was small, its single bed a cold, stark contrast to my plush queen-sized mattress and the familiar furniture I had picked out myself. The room was a prison, and I was its newly appointed inmate. As they drove away, leaving me alone in the silent, empty house, I stood in the dark hallway, a single, bitter tear tracing a path down my cheek. The scent of the feast still lingered, a mocking reminder of the love I had given so freely, and the price they had decided to charge me for it. I had paid for their education, but they had locked me out of my own room, and the chilling realization of what was to come washed over me like a tidal wave. The days that followed Thanksgiving were a surreal descent into a new reality. The lock on my bedroom door, a cold, unblinking eye in the hallway, became the physical symbol of my confinement. My children, Robert and Susan, had returned to their lives, leaving me to fend for myself in a house that no longer felt like mine. They called occasionally, their conversations brief and businesslike, always circling back to my transition. Robert would inquire about my health, my pension, and my willingness to sign over power of attorney. Susan would talk about the wonderful amenities at the assisted living community they had chosen, a place she described in the bright, cheerful tones of a real estate agent trying to sell a timeshare. I felt like a piece of property they were negotiating over, a problem to be solved and filed away. Clara, Robert's wife, had been particularly cruel. She had called me a few days after Thanksgiving, ostensibly to check on me, but her words were laced with a venomous sweetness. "I hope you're enjoying your new room, Eleanor. You know, we're thinking of redoing your master bedroom. It's just so dated. Robert and I have always thought it would be the perfect nursery for our future grandchildren. It's so much bigger than the guest room, you know. But you won't have to worry about that now." Her words, delivered with a smug, self-satisfied tone, were meant to crush my spirit. I could picture her on the other end of the line, her perfect, painted lips curled into a smile of triumph. They weren't just trying to move me out, they were erasing me. They were planning a future for this house that had no place for me, a future for grandchildren who were not even born yet, in a room that was still my own. I tried to fight back, to assert myself. One morning, I called Robert, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Robert," I said, "I am your mother. This is my house. I do not want to go to an assisted living facility. I want my keys back. I want to be in my own room." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mom," he finally said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, "we are doing this because we love you. You can't handle the responsibility anymore. It's for your own safety. The doctor said your memory is starting to slip." He was referring to a visit to a new doctor they had insisted I see a few months ago, a man who, in my opinion, was more interested in pleasing my son than in my actual health. The doctor had, indeed, noted some age-related cognitive decline, a phrase that Robert and Susan had seized upon and weaponized against me. I felt the tears welling in my eyes, not just from the injustice, but from the insidious lie they had woven. My memory was fine. My mind was as sharp as ever, a mind that had balanced household budgets and helped them with their college essays. But they had painted a picture of a frail, senile old woman, and they were determined to make that picture a reality. The physical confinement was only part of the problem. My house, once a source of comfort, now felt like a cage. My belongings were being moved, bit by bit, to storage. One day, I came home from a walk to find a large moving van parked outside. Men in uniform were carrying my mother's old chest of drawers, the one I had just polished, out of the living room. I rushed out to them, my heart pounding. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Where are you taking that?" One of the men, a kind-looking young man with a tired face, looked at me with a mixture of pity and confusion. "Ma'am, we were told these items were for storage. We have a list from a Mr. Robert Johnson." He held up a clipboard with a neatly typed list of my possessions. My son had not even told me he was doing this. He had simply arranged for my life to be packed away, piece by piece, without my consent. I stood there, helpless, watching a lifetime of memories being carted away. My internal conflict was a raging storm. I was a proud woman, a strong woman who had overcome so much. I had raised 2 successful children as a single mother after Thomas died. I had managed the family finances, kept this house immaculate, and navigated the complexities of a changing world. And now I was being treated like a child, my every decision second-guessed, my very existence questioned. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain. I would lie awake at night in that small guest room, listening to the creaks and groans of my old house and remember all the sacrifices I had made. The late nights I had spent helping Robert with his law school applications, the weekends I had spent driving Susan to her architectural internships, the money I had given them without a second thought. I had done it all out of love, a pure, selfless love that had now become a weapon to be used against me. The bitterness was a physical thing, a sour taste in my mouth, a burning in my chest. I wanted to scream, to rage, to make them understand the pain they were causing. But they had insulated themselves with a cold, corporate indifference, and my voice, I feared, would never reach them. The final insult came on a Tuesday. I had a doctor's appointment and needed to get some groceries. I went in my purse, a small, worn leather bag that held the entirety of my life. My credit cards, my driver's license, my small amount of cash, they were all gone. I searched frantically, tearing through the room, the living room, the kitchen, but they were nowhere to be found. A few hours later, my phone rang. It was Clara. "Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with the same saccharine-sweet venom, "Robert and I are so worried about your spending. You're being so irresponsible. We have taken your cards for your own good. We've set up a small allowance for you, just enough for groceries. We'll transfer it to your account every week. It's what's best." The humiliation was complete. I was a grown woman, a woman who had managed a household for 50 years, and I was now on an allowance, a meager stipend doled out by the very people who owed their success to my generosity. The fire of my initial anger was now a cold, burning ember of resolve. They had taken my house, my memories, my dignity, and now my freedom. I would not let them take me. The time for sorrow was over. The time for action was about to begin. I had no idea what I was going to do, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it had to be something that would make them truly understand the price of my love and their betrayal. The cold, hard resolve that had been a smoldering ember in my chest now ignited into a quiet, burning flame. I spent my days in a state of watchful observation, my mind a whirlwind of memories and calculations. The world around me had become a hostile, unfamiliar place. My children, Robert and Susan, had all but ceased their calls, their brief, perfunctory messages now a new form of neglect. Clara, however, continued her campaign of psychological warfare, calling to check in and deliver a fresh volley of condescension. She spoke of new drapes for my living room, of plans to repurpose the study, and of an exciting new phase of my life in the assisted living facility. Each call was a fresh reminder of their greed, a new thread in the web they were weaving around me. My days were a cycle of small, private humiliations. The allowance they had granted me was barely enough for food, a cruel testament to their belief that my needs were minimal. I was forced to live off the scraps of my own life, a guest in my own home, treated as if I were a burden, a problem to be managed. The sight of my locked bedroom door, its polished brass doorknob an ironic testament to the dignity it now denied me, was a constant source of pain. I would stand in front of it, my hand reaching out to touch the smooth, cool wood and remember all the moments that had unfolded behind it, the quiet conversations with Thomas, the late-night feeds with a crying baby, the hours spent reading in bed. The sanctuary it had always been. They had taken it all away, leaving me with a hollow, echoing silence. One day, as I was sitting alone in the living room, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. I wasn't a victim. I was a strategist. They had made a fatal error, a mistake born of arrogance and a complete underestimation of the woman they were so eager to dismiss. They saw an old woman, frail and senile, a pawn in their game of inheritance. But they had forgotten the mind that had helped them navigate the complexities of their lives, the woman who had balanced budgets, negotiated mortgages, and planned their entire futures. I was not a pawn, I was the queen. And the game, I now realized, was only just beginning. My first move was to find my old, forgotten cell phone. It was an ancient flip phone, a relic of a time before smartphones and social media, a device I had tucked away in a small, ornate box in the back of a closet years ago. It had been my emergency phone, and they had never known about it. I found it, its battery long dead, and after a frantic search, located its charger. As it hummed to life, its ancient screen glowing with a faint blue light, I felt a surge of hope, a sense of reclaiming a small piece of my life. I had no contact information, but I remembered one number by heart. It belonged to Margaret, a dear friend of mine since we were teenagers, a woman with a quick mind and a no-nonsense attitude. Margaret was a retired lawyer, and I knew she would understand the gravity of my situation without a single word of unnecessary explanation. I called her, my voice low and trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. I explained everything, the locked room, the stolen credit cards, the pressure to move into assisted living. Margaret listened, her silence a more powerful form of support than any words of pity. "Eleanor," she finally said, her voice a calm, steady anchor in my storm, "this is a crime. What they are doing is elder abuse. We need to act, and we need to be smart about it." Her words gave me the courage I needed. We arranged to meet the next day, and I began a series of small, calculated acts that went unnoticed by my children. I would take my morning walks, but instead of the usual route through the park, I would walk to the nearest internet cafe, a small, bustling place filled with the hum of computers and the smell of coffee. I was a ghost in their digital world, a face in the crowd they would never notice. There, with Margaret's help, I began to build my case. We consulted with a real estate agent, a woman Margaret knew from her old law firm. I explained my desire to sell my house, but with one condition: it had to be a quiet, private sale. I wanted no public listings, no signs in the yard, no open houses. The agent, a shrewd and understanding woman named Brenda, agreed. She had a list of private clients, people who were looking for a property exactly like mine, a historic colonial in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. The process was slow, painstaking, and filled with a constant, low-level anxiety. Every phone call I made to Brenda had to be from the internet cafe, every email sent with a borrowed account. I lived in constant fear of discovery. I would return home, my heart pounding in my chest, and pretend that everything was normal. I would smile at Clara when she called, agree with Robert when he spoke about my future, and nod along with Susan when she described the wonderful amenities of the nursing home. I was playing a part, a performance of a frail, submissive old woman, while secretly, I was a revolutionary, a woman on the verge of a quiet, life-altering triumph. The day the final offer came in, I was at the internet cafe. Brenda's email, a single line of text, was all it took. "We have an offer that meets your terms. The closing date is set for next Tuesday." I sat there, staring at the screen, tears of relief and triumph streaming down my face. It was done. The house, the place that had been my sanctuary and now my prison, was sold. They had built their future on the assumption that this house was theirs, that I was a problem to be solved and filed away. But they had failed to consider one thing: the owner. And now, the owner was about to make a very big move, a move that would upend their entire world. The closing date was set, a date that coincided with Robert and Clara's anniversary celebration, a day they had planned to spend in my home. I smiled to myself, a bitter, triumphant smile. They had prepared for a celebration, but they were about to witness a demolition. The day of the closing, a Tuesday, was also Robert and Clara's 10th wedding anniversary. They had planned a small, intimate gathering at my home, a final, triumphant celebration before they moved me out and began renovations. I had been asked, with a chillingly formal politeness, to stay in my guest room, so as not to disturb the guests. The irony was so profound it was almost comical. They were celebrating a life built on my sacrifice, in a house they believed was their future, completely unaware that the foundation of that life, and that house, had been sold right out from under them. I spent the morning quietly packing a single suitcase. It held a few clothes, some old photographs, and a small, leather-bound journal that contained all my memories. My heart was a turbulent sea of conflicting emotions. There was a profound sadness for what my family had become, a deep grief for the love that had been so ruthlessly betrayed. But there was also a fierce sense of triumph, a powerful surge of vindication that coursed through my veins. I was no longer a victim, I was a victor. I had found my strength, my dignity, and my freedom in the most unexpected of places. The guests began to arrive in the late afternoon. I could hear their laughter, the clinking of glasses, the hum of polite conversation, a world of celebration and happiness from which I was deliberately excluded. I sat on my single bed, the closed door of the guest room a final, physical barrier between myself and the family I had raised. The time for my great reveal was approaching, and my hands, which had once been so busy preparing feasts for them, were now trembling with anticipation. Just before dinner, there was a knock on my door. It was Robert. He stood there, his face a mask of faux concern, holding a small plate with a slice of cake. "Mom," he said, his voice the same flat, businesslike tone he used to discuss mergers, "we've started dinner. We thought you might want a slice of cake. We'll be busy for a while, so." He trailed off, his eyes avoiding mine. The message was clear: they were locking me in for the evening. The cake was an insult, a tiny, meager scrap of a celebration they would not allow me to join. I looked at the slice of cake, at the perfectly piped frosting, and a wave of cold, hard rage washed over me. This was the final straw. "Thank you, Robert," I said, my voice calm, but with an iron edge he had never heard before. "This is very kind of you. But I have a much better offer for dinner." I stood up, walked past him, and headed toward the living room, my every step a declaration of war. He tried to stop me, his hand on my arm, but I brushed it off. "Mom, what are you doing? You can't just..." He stammered, his facade of control beginning to crack. "I am going to get my keys," I said, my voice cutting through his, "and then I am going to make an announcement. You and your guests will want to hear this." I walked into the living room, a space now filled with a crowd of smiling, well-dressed people, a tableau of a perfect, successful family. I stood at the doorway, and the chatter slowly died down, a hush falling over the room as every eye turned to me, the old woman who was not supposed to be there. "I apologize for the interruption," I said, my voice echoing through the silent room. "But there's been a slight change of plans." I looked directly at Robert, at Clara, and at Susan. Their faces were a mixture of shock and dawning horror. They had no idea what was happening, and the sight of their perfect world beginning to crumble was the sweetest revenge I had ever known. "This is a lovely party," I continued, "and a lovely house. I'm sure you have all admired it. The lovely floors, the new paint, the beautiful garden. All things my children, Robert and Susan, have been so eager to take over. But unfortunately, there has been a slight misunderstanding. As of noon today, this house is no longer mine. I have sold it." The words hung in the air, a devastating silence broken only by a few gasps. "The new owners," I said, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across my face, "will be arriving tomorrow morning to begin renovations. They have asked that all of the current occupants and their belongings be removed from the premises by midnight tonight. So you see, there's no need to worry about my transition into assisted living. I will not be needing it. But you all will be needing to find a place to stay." The chaos that followed was a symphony of stunned disbelief and open rage. Robert rushed toward me, his face red with fury. "Mom, you can't do this. You can't. This is our inheritance." Clara, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock, began to scream at me, demanding to know how I could have done such a thing. Susan, my sweet, sensitive Susan, began to cry, but her tears were not for me. They were for the loss of the future she had so selfishly planned. I looked at them, at their greed, their anger, their complete and utter betrayal, and I felt nothing but a quiet, profound sense of peace. I had given them a lifetime of love and sacrifice, and they had given me back a cage. And now I had given them back a cage of their own making. I walked out of the house, my single suitcase in my hand, the keys to my former home clasped in my palm. The front door closed behind me, a final, symbolic gesture. The people inside, the people I had raised and loved, were now strangers, a memory of a family that no longer existed. I had won. I had found my freedom, my dignity, and my strength. As I walked down the street, my steps light and free, I looked back at the house, a monument to a past that was now just a memory. I had sold the entire house, and in doing so, I had not only regained my life, but I had also left them with the most devastating gift of all, the consequences of their own actions. My revenge was not a bitter, vengeful act, but an act of liberation. And it was so sweet.